After the return from the Babylonian exile, Ezra and Nehemiah led efforts to rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem and the city walls, restoring the religious and national identity of the Jews. The rebuilding of the Temple and the walls of Jerusalem, led by Ezra and Nehemiah, is a crucial event in the history of the Jewish people after their return from the Babylonian exile. Here is a summary of these events as narrated in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Return to Jerusalem. Following King Cyrus's decree allowing the Jewish exiles to return to their homeland, a group led by Zerubbabel, along with the high priest Joshua, returns to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. This event marks the beginning of the first return. Rebuilding the temple. Zerubbabel and Joshua begin rebuilding the temple but face opposition from the Samaritans and other local enemies who try to hinder the progress of the work. Despite the difficulties, the temple is finally completed and dedicated to God. Arrival of Ezra. About 60 years after the completion of the temple, Ezra, a priest and scribe well-versed in the law of Moses, arrives in Jerusalem with a royal commission to teach and apply God's law. He is sent by King Artaxerxes of Persia. Religious reform. Ezra leads a religious reform in Jerusalem, exhorting the people to repent of their sins and turn back to God. He also gathers a large assembly where God's law is publicly read and explained to the people. Arrival of Nehemiah. Shortly thereafter, Nehemiah, a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes, receives permission to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the city walls. Nehemiah leads this endeavor, facing opposition from external enemies and discouragement among the Jews themselves. Rebuilding the walls. Nehemiah and his people work diligently to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, organizing themselves into groups to tackle the challenges of reconstruction and defense against enemies. Despite threats and attempts at intimidation, the walls are rebuilt in record time. Dedication of the walls. After the walls are completed, Nehemiah organizes a grand dedication ceremony where the people celebrate with joy and gratitude to God for his protection and provision during the reconstruction process. These events of rebuilding the temple and the walls of Jerusalem represent a period of spiritual renewal and national restoration for the Jewish people. They demonstrate God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises and his willingness to restore his people, even after periods of affliction and exile.